Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member from Kenora.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure for me to stand here in my place to speak on this bill C-4. But before I do that, I just want to let the Speaker know that I'll be splitting my time with the member from Davenport. So I wanted to make sure I got that in before I usually forget. Well, Madam Speaker, I want to start off by talking a little bit about my background, because I think it's important for the members to know that I am one of those union bosses that the members opposite are talking about. I'm one of those people who was high up in the union movement in the 80s and the 70s, for that matter, before I became a member of Parliament. And I guess I must be the one that they're targeting that was not accountable, was not transparent, and had something to hide that they're trying to fix in those pieces of legislation we're speaking to. So I wanted to come clean right off the bat, Madam Speaker, that I have a particular bias, that I am a labour unionist and very proud of it. And I think this country has a long history of the organized labour movement, and it's done well by the history of making those kinds of changes. And so I wanted to get on my feet today, Madam Speaker, to try and put some sense to this. So let's talk a little bit of history of the labour movement. I mean, it's pretty clear that the labour movement has had huge impacts on blue-collar workers, on workers in Canada. Part of that is obviously better wages, better working hours, health and safety, which is one of the main reasons why unions started in the first place, because they were under very severe pressure to work in unsafe conditions in the early parts of our history, Madam Speaker. And so labour movement got started because of the lack of protection of the everyday man and woman working on in the different workplaces in Canada. Madam Speaker, I wanted to share with you, though, this race to the bottom that the Conservative Party and the Reform Party before it has been bringing to this House for the last 20 years that I've been involved. And it scares me because we speak in this House about different subject matters. And I'll use the example of the Canada Pension Plan and pensions in general. And the labour movement, Madam Speaker, had a huge role to play in bringing pensions, good pensions, to men and women all across the country in order to supplement their retirement income, because obviously we know that the Government of Canada can't look after all our seniors after retirement, that in fact the pension plans that are put in and the funding that's put in between the employers and employees are a very important part of our economy today. And so we not only talk about the collective bargaining structure, we talk about the social aspects of what collective bargaining and organized labour can do. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to maybe give you a little bit about a study that I've been reading by the Boston Consulting Group in 2012. And here's what I found out. That on average, 14 cents of every dollar of income in Ontario communities comes from pensions. That means in Ontario, 7% of all income in our towns and cities, or $27 billion, is derived from defined benefit pensions. So, Madam Speaker, instead of trying to diminish labour, in fact, we should be trying to strengthen our relationship with employers and employees so that there are more pensions in the workplace, so that our pensioners, the people that we here represent in the House, have a good retirement. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to represent retired railroaders, mill workers, miners, all these people in the Kenora Rainy River District that I've been a member of Parliament for the last 16 years previously, and now the Kenora riding. Madam Speaker, these people have good pensions. Those workers were represented by organized labour. They had huge benefits because of good collective bargaining. That doesn't mean that the employers didn't make money. I mean, I was a railroader, Madam Speaker. I represented the railway unions. Those railways made money in the days when I was there negotiating collective bargaining agreements with them. So the fact that somehow the previous government felt it was in their best interest to try and diminish the organized labour makes me wonder what the motive of that really is. Because in fact, it does more harm to Canada than it does good. So, Madam Speaker, we should be strengthening the opportunity for organized labour to work with the government and with the employers instead of the reverse. Madam Speaker, this is a very dangerous precedent the previous government set. The balance between labour and employers has always been hard to arrive at. We've spent, I bet you, 100 years trying to get the balance right, provincially, federally, even municipally. And to have a private member's bill be foisted on us without any discussion between the key players, being labour and the government and employers through the tripartite process that's been ongoing at the Department of Labour federally for as long as I can remember, is a very dangerous precedent by any government. Even Brian Mulroney's government wouldn't have done something like that, because I was involved in those days in opposition when Brian Mulroney's government wanted to bring some changes to the Canada Labour Code. And they used the tripartite process, Madam Speaker. So why would this party, called the Conservative Party, I think too many reformers in there still, really need to start thinking about what exactly their intent is in going and getting involved in provincial jurisdiction that has nothing to do with the federal government, and using the Income Tax Act to do so, Madam Speaker. That's exactly why this government is appealing those pieces of legislation. Because, first of all, it's not our jurisdiction. Second of all, it's unconstitutional, and we all know that, and we know that if we don't do anything about it, the courts will throw it out like they did many pieces of legislation that this government brought in. So we're doing the right thing, putting in place the balance. The balance is always difficult to achieve. Yes, sometimes workers go on strike. Yes, workers have to go on strike and have the abilities to do that. Yes, they do have to have the ability to certify. And yes, Madam Speaker, they have to be able to do it without everybody in the world knowing what their strategy and their plan is. It's pretty hard to negotiate with both hands tied behind your back, which means what this government is proposing to do under the legislation is tell the employer on the other side all their financial resources, who they're speaking to, what they're proposing to do, and yes, if they are putting money into social issues or into campaigns, that's their prerogative. And I can tell you this, Madam Speaker, because I was there at the top end of the union. Union members know where their money is spent. This is ridiculous for any party to be suggesting to the average Canadian that somehow the workers don't know where their money goes and their dues. Madam Speaker, we all know that that's just a fabrication to make it sound like it has to be done. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say to you in this place that these two pieces of legislation destabilize that very close, careful balance that we in Canada, as legislators, have tried for many, many years to make sure it stays intact. This legislation that we're trying to repeal is going to be repealed because we want to make sure that the relationship between labour and the government and the employers is one that can be respected, and collective bargaining is going to be done in a way that it's always been done, between the employer and the unions, and they'll work it out, and that's what legislation is intended to do for the Canadian workers and their employers. Lastly, Madam Speaker, I just want to speak a little bit to you about the importance of our new government's relationship, not just with Labour, but with the Canadian people. Yes, you're going to see in this place, Madam Speaker, over the next number of months, us as a government probably remove a number of pieces of legislation that side brought in that we think is counterproductive to building a good society. And we should not, on this side of the House, I hope, ever feel like we have to find an excuse as to why we shouldn't be doing that. Because we ran on a platform that said we're not going to allow those kinds of things to happen anymore, and we're going to have respect for the labour movement, we're going to have respect for Canadians, and that's what I think we're going to do, Madam Speaker. So thank you very much for letting me speak today.
Questions and comments. The honourable member from Simcoe Grey.
Hi, and thank you very much. much, Madam Speaker. I just at first would like to correct the record. I want to be very clear, and I would encourage the member opposite to speak to whether that be Jerry Dias or Hussein Yousaf or numerous other union leaders in this country about how Labour Canada and myself as Minister of Labour conducted ourselves in tripartite relationships. Bill 525, a number of changes that were placed in the Canada Labour Code of late. The new legislation that was put forward to make sure interns are protected in the workplace were all done under a tripartite relationship that was respected. One that I would encourage the member opposite to speak to Mr. Dias about or to speak to Hussein Yousaf about, because they participated in making sure that that was appropriate. I think it's extremely important that the Canadian public understand that this side of the House respects all workers. And for myself, that was exceptionally important. And I do take offense to the member opposite intimating that that was not the case. What I'd like to ask the member opposite, though, with respect to this, is that if he believes that nothing was done in a tripartite way, did he actually check that on the record? Has he done that numerous times? But also, does he have comments with respect to those issues related to secret ballot voting, like in 525, which many of the members of my riding have come forward with, saying that that's what they would like, just like in a secret ballot when you cast your ballot in Canada's democracy. Thank you very much.
Honourable member from Kenora.
Well, Madam Speaker, it's quite interesting that the Minister of Labour, who was the Minister of Labour, stands up in this place and tells us that, defends her time as the Minister of Labour. But then, Madam Speaker, at the same time doesn't tell us why she went through the back door with a piece of legislation that was a private member's bill. Like, why not use the regular process, Madam Speaker, to show a little courage to have a real debate about the Canada Labour Code and its ramifications to the process? Now, Madam Speaker, if there was a discussion about this process, then obviously it would have been a sponsored Minister of Labour bill, not a private member's bill. So I don't know what exactly she's talking about. But I'll tell you this, Madam Speaker, about the previous government. The previous government has this bad habit of picking enemies, making everyone who doesn't agree with them an enemy of the state. So I think what they did is they decided that organized labour is an enemy of the state, like scientists were, or like environmentalists, or anybody who disagreed with their platform, Madam Speaker. So in the last election, I think people spoke about their involvement with Labour, and that is that they disagree with everything they were doing.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member from Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank the member from Kenora for his good words about the role of unions in extending defined benefit pension coverage. Another way of extending defined benefit pension coverage would be by expanding the Canada Pension Plan. Now, Madam Speaker, it took 3 ghosts to scare and convince Ebenezer Scrooge. But just before Christmas, the Minister of Finance met with the provinces, and he was scared away by only 2 ghosts, Brad Wall and Christy Clark. And I wonder if the member for Kenora could perhaps talk some sense to the Minister of Finance and convince him to proceed with an expansion of the Canada Pension Plan.
Oh, good job. The honourable member from Kenora.
Well, Madam Speaker, I can say to the member that this side of the House agrees and understands that the Canada Pension Plan needs some serious change and work. And the Minister of Finance, we're quite convinced, is working with his colleagues for one simple reason, to try and make those changes. Everyone we talked to on the hustings, Madam Speaker, I went door to door, thanks to the previous government and their leader, for 11 straight months. Well, that's not true. I started about 6 months before that. But during all that time when I went door to door, every pensioner who only had the Canada pension to rely on said that this party, that government over there, the previous government, let Canadians down by doing nothing with the Canada pension, and this side will make sure that we correct that, even if it does take us a little while to do it, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate.